helicopter capacities aren't sufficient to be able to do that.
All right, but why aren't you including new ways to make this possible, not just for helicopters?
There is a recommendation that addresses exactly what you said. And this recommendation says evaluate the full range of current and next generation evacuation technologies that include exterior escape devices. And so that is really part of our recommendations.
Next question.
My name is Jean Grillo, and I am co-director of a community emergency response team down here in Tribeca. And I wanted to address the two-way radio situation, because I just trained 30 first responders, 30 CERT members, and I recently acquired a grant to purchase radios. But I'm frustrated because you say the two-way radio frequency was difficult to penetrate steel and reinforced concrete, which is what the two high-rises in Tribeca that we have to consider as first responders are made of. And rather than spend the money on radios that aren't going to work, what recommendations are you making to insist that such a radio be created if it doesn't exist? I mean, is there some sort of follow-up so I can wait before I spend that money on a radio that doesn't work?
Well, I think as with all technologies, much like buying automobiles, there are different kinds of technologies that you can buy. And some technologies do work and some don't. And I would encourage you to consult with people who are experienced in the business that actually have systems that work within high-rise buildings. I mean, their police department. Yeah, there are some that exist. Some that exist, and there are some new technologies that are based on mesh networks as opposed to two-way radios. Wireless technologies that exist. So one of the programs, federal programs that's dealing with that is something called SAFE-COM, Safe Communications. And it's within the Department of Homeland Security in their Science and Technology Directorate.
If you give me a card or a contact information, I'll make sure that we get to you with some specifics.
Yeah, we have somebody to get you information.
Next question is...
Yes, I'm a member of Margaret with the Concrete Alliance. I also live and work in this area. Could you please be more specific about the term that you use, hardened? I've noticed you use it a number of times, but I want to get more of a fix on it.
I've used that term in the context of elevators, and because there has been work done on what are known as fire-protected elevators historically, and such elevators are actually used in Europe, some parts of Europe and some parts of Asia in the new buildings that are being built. But fire-protected elevators would function if you had a fire, which would include smoke, water, that sort of stuff. We're talking here about not only fire-protected, but also structurally hardened. And structurally hardened would have the capability that if you had an accidental explosion of some type, or an accidental load of type due to if you had strong debris from a hurricane or a tornado that came in, or some other gas explosion, if you have gas pipelines going into the building and there was a gas explosion, that the shaft or the elevator itself, the elevator cab itself, and the shaft around it would be able to withstand that impact.
What materials are you thinking of?
Again, there are probably alternative materials that can be used, and they're coming from the Concrete Alliance. The concrete is certainly an option. But as I said, we are not going to be restrictive about either materials or systems or technologies. We believe we would encourage competition among private sector groups to be able to do that.
We have another question. The blue suit against the wall.
Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Nadell. I'm an architect. I'm a member of the American Institute of Architects, and I'm the author of Building Security Handbook for Architectural Planning and Design. I'd like to commend you and the investigation team on the job that you all did. Many of the firms and the individuals on the team are colleagues and friends of mine that have contributed into the book, and I think among the most important aspects to come out of the report is the recommendations and the proactive nature of some of the recommendations, specifically the lessons learned and how the building industry, the architects, engineers, and everybody involved with buildings from here on in the future can apply these lessons and recommendations as we go forward to other buildings. And I would like to encourage you and members of the team to continue to educate and inform the building industry on some of these recommendations and how they can be implemented even if codes do not require them.
Thank you for your comments, and we certainly intend to, part of our outreach efforts, to continue to do what you're suggesting. Thank you.
Okay, just a show of hands for the next several questions. One with the woman, first row there. Also the gentleman with the blue shirt. And woman over here. We'll go with 3, and the 4th is the gentleman right there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Sherry Bender. I live in the downtown area. I understand that NIST believes that fires destroyed buildings, despite that fire has not destroyed any other buildings ever in history, and the only 3 buildings allegedly or apparently destroyed happened on September 11th. My question is, though, in light of the fact of multiple evidence that there were explosives from fire men that worked there, from fire people, from broadcasts and news reporters that claimed they heard explosives, and also from the evidence of Blackstone seen in the PBS special. This is multiple evidence of many people. Why then did NIST not do any explosive residue testing? Thank you.
We did not see any evidence in the, there was, by the way, soon after 9/11, there was a team of experts that did a building performance assessment study, and also the Structural Engineers Association of New York, and some of our own staff went out and visited all of the salvage yards where the scrap from the buildings were, and they looked at all of that steel and selected pieces of steel to study. In all of that exhaustive effort that they took to look at the steel, and including the 236 pieces of steel that we have on campus, there is no evidence that these of any kind of intentional failure of these pieces of steel.
No evidence if you don't
Gentleman in
check.
the blue shirt.
We have no evidence of any kind that there was a shred. I mean, you can look at the steel and how they in an explosion, the blast opens up in a different way.
It's coming out.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate your comments. We appreciate your point of view.
Gentleman in the front row, please.
Hello, my name is John Napolitano. I'm the father of Lieutenant John Napolitano and the FDNY Rescue 2. I have really a brief comment and a very brief question. On the morning of September 12th, I got what the news was called Ground Zero to search for my son. With me was my best friend, Lenny. He's to my right. Lenny retired from the NYPD. I'm a former cop. And we were not only searching for my son, but we were searching for Lenny's brother, Lieutenant John, who hasn't had one. Also missing that day were 3 of my son's childhood friends, students that he went to school with, Pete Brennan, Billy Mahoney, from the FDNY, and Glenn Bennett from the NYPD. I will not go into what I saw. It'll stay with me to the day I die. I will tell you that in my frustration, in the ashes with my finger, I wrote on the wall at a triage area, Rescue 2, John Napolitano, I'm here, and I love his dad. My hope was that if he was found and brought there, that he would see it and give him some strength. Next day, when I got down there, there was messages written back to me in the ashes. Firefighters and police officers and rescue workers from all over the country telling me to not give up hope. On the 14th, the firefighter that worked with my son took a photograph months later, I made contact with that firefighter, and he gave me the photograph of what I wrote. And I thought, you know, pictures worth 1,000 words. My boy had 2 little girls, and they may have a lot of questions. If I'm not here to answer it, some of the questions, what they see, and my message to my son, will give them an idea of what we were going through at that time. Firefighter also gave me a picture of my son that he took in 1993 at the World Trade Center bombing. I'm a very basic guy, born and raised in Brooklyn. And I remember growing up, somebody said to me that somebody was looking for me. Well, I come up with a plan. And my question is this. In 1993, it became very obvious that the World Trade Center was a target of a terrorist attack. And their idea was to bring the building down. I'm wondering if the question was posed to the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, what were they doing from 1993 to 2001 to protect its occupants and the first responders that would have to go there to try to save these people in the event of a suicide bomber? It doesn't have to be a plane, it could be anything. Were they aware that a floor that weighed approximately 300 pounds cannot be supported by the floor below it? I mean, did they think that there could be a partial attack? And if these questions were posed, what were the answers? Was the price exorbitant? Was the price to correct its defects greater than the building coming down and losing all these people and having to rebuild?
We very much appreciate your experiences, and I'm sure the questions you still would want to have answered. And I suspect we're not going to be able to do good justice to it. But what I can say is that that after the 1993 bombings, several steps were taken. I think the main lesson that was learned on the evacuation side was to improve certain aspects of the evacuation process in the buildings, including such things as emergency lighting in the stairwells and phosphorescent paint to guide people down and so forth. And many of those changes also were done, many similar changes were also done by the Fire Department of New York. Their protocols for high-rise operations. But the events of the 1993, where you had a van, a truck bomb, essentially, is quite different from where you have commercial, fuel-laden jet airliners, which are pretty much huge missiles that are being sent into a commercial office building. Buildings aren't designed to withstand that kind of an impact. And I think we have to just recognize that as we look at building safety in the future, that there is a very important need to keep terrorists away from airplanes and airplanes away from buildings. And the job of doing that is really it's not part of the building industry, but it's really part of the folks in law enforcement. And that's a very, very important task. But I think with regard to, and even with the airplane impact, if you exclude the fires, and we've already come out with our findings that suggested that the airplane impact on the buildings withstood the impact pretty well. In fact, they held up. In fact, the buildings would not have collapsed had it not been for the fires. And in fact, we further said buildings would not have collapsed even if the fires were there, but had it not been for the fireproofing that was dislodged by the direct impact of the airplane.
But that's like saying the person would have died if the gun didn't have a bullet, and the bullet wouldn't have killed the guy if the person didn't fire the gun. The fact is this, when you're and I love you, you're a good man, but the bottom line is this. When you say something like that, have you compared the same scenario with other high-rise structures today that were built in the 30s and the 40s? Did you run a simulation on the attack of the Empire State Building, the Chrysler Building, and then see how then you can come back and tell me they stood up pretty well. When two things fall, that's something's wrong. When one thing falls, maybe you're right. But two, and then you fall in the third, the whole thing was flawed. Absolutely incorrect. Absolutely.
We appreciate your point of view, but I will have to respond to that point of view, because one of the things I didn't mention is that one of the major benefits or the major reasons why the building didn't fall upon impact of the airplane was the size of its cross section, which was 208 feet by 208 feet. The plane wingspan to wingspan was 157, less than 160 feet. So the plane could be swallowed within the footprint. Many of the other buildings that you talk about, the planes would not have been swallowed within the footprint.
Yes, but they would have been deterred before they reached inside. They would have crashed. The last one you had showed how the plane went right in, like you said. Had that been a strong structure, it would have disintegrated on impact, and you would have had a small hole, and you would have had the same thing.
If I may, we can have a long offline discussion, but I would like to just point out the Pentagon, which was made out of concrete, a more conventional building, was struck by a 757, a similar kind of plane. And when you put the footprint, a 200 feet cross section on the Pentagon, the damage to that building was as extensive in the area where the plane went in, except it was a much shorter building. And in fact, the fireproofing, in that case, it was a concrete, reinforced concrete building in which the concrete walls fall. So there is damage that is created even on other kinds of buildings.
To be fair, we're going to keep things moving along, and we'll take just a few more questions. We were supposed to end at 4, but we'll stay longer than that. The woman over here, and then the gentleman back here, and then I'll ask you more questions.
Thank you. My name is Andrea Besoris, and I'm a 9/11 World Trade Center victim. Could you speak to a problem where the government indicated that U.S. Customs had seized hazardous materials and poorly stored them in the basin of 6 World Trade? And are we looking at government negligence here? Because these allegedly seized hazardous materials blew up before either tower symmetrically deteriorated into their foundations, each at virtually the free flow rate of gravity. Could you also speak to, in each building, approximately 35 stories of debris? This means 35 stories from Tower 1 and 35 stories additionally of Tower 2 are unaccounted for and presumably pulverized into the atmosphere. And then my third question is, if you supposedly, meaning NIST, supposedly inherited this from FEMA, which was is supposedly an emergency management, meaning this investigation as to the cause for building failures and things related to the structures and physical evidence. However, and you folks are under the Commerce Department, and Don Evans was head of the Commerce Department, who raised $100 million. Is there a difference in your definition of independence versus arm's length? And then, given that the Bush administration didn't permit the convening of the 9/11 Commission until 14 months, as far as I recall, all the debris was cleared from the site, and that even the fires, which had continued to burn for 100 days, that you folks weren't convened yet. The Bush Commission wasn't convened until more than 14 months later. So I don't understand, are we dealing with their pre-knowledge or their acknowledgement internally that they were going to have to answer for themselves, and so you folks they bucked up for some funding for you folks? Thank you.
Well, again, we appreciate your question. I have to say that NIST you have to go and look at the history of NIST. It's an organization that's in existence for over a century. It used to be called the Bureau of Standards. It has a long tradition of service to the country, of doing objective, impartial, and independent investigations of various kinds of science and technology questions the American public has faced. And we believe that what we have done here is absolutely consistent with our traditions and history.
Okay, I'm going to take that one additional question here, and then I'll ask for just 2 more questions, and then conclude. So this gentleman first.
Hello, my name is Walter Rock here. I represent a nexus of the different groups here. You mentioned that the film and archives that you have in your position are patent protected or whatever. Can you provide a list of what they are and who the owners are so we can contact them for the permissions?
The process for doing that is to submit a federal Freedom of Information Act request, and you will find information on that on the NIST website, NIST main website, and go through that process.
But can you give us a list of how to refer to them?
You have to put in a request under the Freedom of Information Act. It's a statute that will govern your request.
I understand the statute, but what I'm asking for is some way to identify the features that we're requesting in the FOIL. Because if we can't identify it, you can't respond to it.
We're going to put on our website additional information about access to materials, because now that the investigation is, for the bulk of it, coming to a close, we'll be addressing that, including issues exactly as you say. If you want to look on the NIST website or hit me directly, your contact information. We have additional information that might help you in doing that so that you don't have to reach widely.
Okay, and I have a second request. Can we get a letter from you for presentation in front of a federal judge for another expansion on our federal lawsuit under 18 U.S.C. 1330?
I have to quote to you the statute under which we were created. According to the statute, no part of any report resulting from a NIST investigation into a structural failure or from an investigation under the National Construction Safety Act may be used in any suit or action for damages arising out of any matter mentioned in such report. So it's by law, you cannot use these reports in court. The main purpose of our investigations is to improve public safety in the United States.
Okay, we'll take 2 more questions, and then we'll, this gentleman here and this gentleman here.
I had my hand up the whole time.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to be fair. I've walked around the room.
I believe there was a question I asked earlier that I responded to. I'm going to insist on it.
Matthew,
I will insist on it.
We'll take, excuse me, we're trying our very best to be open. We will take your question as the final question.
Yes, I believe there was a question asked earlier that wasn't responded to. What was the actual duration of the, in other words, the collapse time of building 1 and 2? I don't see that in the report.
I think what is incredibly important for you, everybody, to understand is once the airplane hit and the damage that it did and the subsequent fires that took place, what is important is what got the building to the point of collapse initiation. A major focus of our effort has been on trying to understand the entire process from the minute the airplane hit, or the second, or the fraction of a second before it hit, all the way through the fires and all the way through up to the point of collapse initiation. Collapse initiation, and we presented that evidence, and I'd be happy to discuss that evidence with you after the fact.
We should find out how many seconds.
Well,
how many seconds? That's something you need to
that's not.
Let me
Excuse me, we're going to try to let Dr. Sunder answer the question.
That's a pretty basic question. How come that wasn't addressed?
Let me come to the question. The question that you're talking about is the 10 seconds of time, or approximately anywhere between 9 and 12 seconds or 15 seconds of time.
That's not an answer.
15 seconds is a lie.
That's not an answer.
That's
a lie.
That's innovation.
That's innovation.
Folks, we're trying to conduct this in a reasonable manner. You've asked him a question. If you're not happy with the answer, you're not happy with the answer. But he's answered he's answered the question. The next person who has the microphone is right here.
My name is Ronald Crenshaw. I'm with 9/11 Group. And I want to know, were not the buildings designed to withstand a 737 plane crashing into it? And 2, weren't they designed to withstand 160 mile per hour wind? And another thing, one other point is the heat generated by jet fuel goes to about no more than 1,500 or 1,550 degrees. And the requirement for compromising steel should be in the order of 2,700 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a big disparity. So that's what's perplexing and annoying to me.
Okay, there are three parts to your question, and I'll try and answer, I guess, or two parts to your question. I'll try and answer both of them. One, you talked about the fact that the buildings, when they were initially designed, were designed to withstand an airplane impact. The specific buildings, we have gone public with the documents. In fact, today, there should be a 3-page attachment to one of the reports, Project 2, which shows you what the Port Authority did in February of 1964. That document says that they considered both a 707 and a DC-8, and they considered that it was flying at 600 miles per hour. We have said before, and I will restate for you now, and it's in our reports, that we found no evidence of a rigorous engineering study to support that finding. We have already said that. Second, you talked about the temperatures due to a fire and the compromising of the steel. Typical building fires, including a jet fuel ignited building fire, reach maximum temperatures on the order of 1,000 to 1,200 degrees centigrade or Celsius. The melting point of steel is 1,600 or 1,700 degrees Celsius. However, when steel reaches half its melting point, that is around 700 degrees, it loses 90% of its strength. So it becomes soft. It becomes like Play-Doh. So when you reach temperatures of 600, 700, 800 degrees, you already are having material that looks like Play-Doh. So that's a key part. All of those details were actually modeled and are described in those reports. So if you or your technical experts go through those reports, you will find all of that information.
Okay, the last question.
Thank you. Eric Rossi. I have 3 quick questions. Hopefully they'll just elicit 3 quick answers. One is, did you hear and find out about and ask about the report that one of the people that from the controlled demolition company that cleaned up the site, I believe it was them, or another company that was cleaning up the site discovered molten steel at the bottom of the towers several weeks later? Either several weeks later or a month and a half later.
You want me to answer that question
Yes.
first? Yes, we heard about it. We read reports about it. Much of that happened at the bottom of in the cauldron, as it was so-called called. But that was not. That's after the buildings already collapsed.
And did you attempt to explain that?
It's irrelevant because what brought the building down is the irrelevant question. Is what caused the building to collapse from up above there. And I think we've shown evidence of the inward going of the south wall of the building minutes before collapse. We've shown you the building tilting to the south side on the top and coming down as a rigid body. So once you get to the bottom, you have lots of electrical systems. You have, for example, there was, in Building 7 there was a condensation station, but there are electrical power subsystems and substations at the bottom of those buildings, and certainly those are where once you have a hot material that is enclosed and shielded from that heat being radiated out in cooling, you're going to have a radiation and conduction and heating that temperatures, local temperatures that can go very high.
Okay, thank you. And I have another quick question. Did you attempt to explain the phenomenon of the pulverization of all the objects in the building into a dust, all of the concrete and all of the office furniture, the people, everything into a fine dust? What's the answer to that?
That's a very good question. In fact, what happens is once the top rigid body, let's say about the 93rd floor in Building 1 and floor 80 in Building what's happening is that rigid body is hitting each floor. And once it hits that floor fails and goes on to the next floor. You have a air pocket in between. One is you find an air jet going out, just like mini tornadoes going out from the pancaking of the floors.
I was actually addressing the issue of what's causing the objects to be pulverized.
Pulverized is the potential energy that's being unleashed by the weight of the building about. And you can do calculations to show that. And what you find is that the concrete and all of the gypsum partitions and furniture, as well as the fireproofing, all of that is pulverized, and you won't find anything left.
Excellent, thank you. And I
That's
have
not what the film footage showed. The film footage showed that the buildings went down in free fall, not pancaking. That is not correct.
We appreciate your comments. Again, let me just say that the free fall is because the structure provides no resistance because of the amount of potential energy that's please do a calculation and ask any professor.
It has nothing to do with potential energy.
Absolutely.
We're not morons here. The buildings went down in free fall.
The last question, please.
Thank you. Just one last question. Regarding the comments of Larry Silverstein on that program, Rebuilding America, did you attempt to contact Larry Silverstein after he said that a decision was made to pull the building as to what that meant?
Let me just say that our main focus here is on the collapse analysis of these buildings, and we have got all of the evidence we need, physical evidence, visual evidence, analytical evidence.
Did he speak out of turn, or what's up with that statement that he made?
We have the evidence that we need to stand behind.
What reason would Larry Silverstein have to lie about making a statement like that? And would you mind explaining in connection with that, okay, how the building 7 could come down in a non-treasonous manner by demolition, or, as for Larry Silverstein, we pulled the building. It was demolished. How could that possibly happen?
Those of you
7 hours elapsed between the fall of the first 2 buildings and building 7. How could that possibly be?
Your reported workers a lie.
If you have any further comments, then the presentation has information about where to contact us, and we're happy to receive those. Thank you for coming.
How do you even sleep at night? That's what I want to know. How many of you even sleep at night?
This is just another cover-up by the Bush administration. Thank you very much.